the next thing we're going to talk about is establishing identity. And this is another favorite of mine as well, too. So establishing identity is really important. I feel like a lot of times environment artists, when they first start out, they have this idea of like, oh, if it's a supermarket, I'll name it supermarket. And it's like, that's not always the best thing to do, because then you're not able to establish a real identity or location to the places that you're making. And so by actually giving false names or ideas to the places that you're establishing, that gives more immersion to the viewer and the player and whoever else sees your scene, as to like understanding it. This is a universe that they're now viewing. They've now entered, and it actually has its own places, like states, names, locations, countries, all those things, regardless if they're real or not. So here's a scene from Gears of War 4. I got to work on a lot of the assets for this scene as well. Mostly for like the iconography and like labeling of the scene. And so with this guy, essentially we're just trying to create this space where it had this idea of like this once like powerful conglomerate of burger like companies, after this post-apocalyptic world. And so by doing this, we're establishing that there was a universe and there was a place before we existed in this world. Like before our own eyes saw this location, this was something way beyond us. So that it kind of gives it more of a feeling of like the universe is bigger than the player themselves. And here's one of the assets I made for that as well, for this the Major Burger mascot here. And one of the signs I also created for that. And this is another shot from that same scene. Another artist worked on this particular location in the level, but you can see here, we're still establishing that story. We're giving an idea to a basis of location. Even in the background, we can see like the plateaus within the background that give an idea of like, oh, this must be some kind of desert area. And this must be some, where, RVs used to stay. And then it had all these like, nice amenities and things of that nature. But we're all just seeing this secondhand as to like, we're now entering this space as a viewer, and we're understanding that this space existed way before we were there. And the other thing is too, with iconography, it really can be simple or complex. So for instance in Gears, one of my favorite things was that it could be really simple as like establishing who owned something or who controlled something by the iconography on it. So like during Gears, anytime you had that cog symbol, you knew that the coalition owned this property. This was once a coalition funded asset. However this was established and made, it was made by the coalition. And so having all these branding and these terms of like iconography on those assets within the scene, it gives you that idea without even having to be told that. So even without all the words on it, you could remove all that and you could still see by the cog symbol that this was owned by the coalition. This is another scene that I worked on. This one's a bit older, but this one you can see like a lot of the iconography in the background and labeling is Russian. So we get an idea of context, of sense of time, sense of place, and then where we're at in the world. So without even having to do much or say much, we already kind of have an idea of where we're grounded as a player. So if we were to immediately jump into a game that looked just like this, we'd immediately have a general idea or context as to where we are located. And here's the outside of that laundromat that we were talking about earlier. So we can see here with the labeling of the King Wash, we know that this is like a branded location. So we can assume that either this is a franchise or something that exists in this imaginary world that we're creating. The same thing goes for this fizz machine that's in there. It's just another layer of branding. So even like it really depends. It's like as you're creating these assets and as you're creating these stories, it's really important to even think about the little nuances. So something like soda, instead of naming the soda machine soda, it makes it so much more fulfilling to the player and the viewer if they see a soda machine that actually represents something that they could imagine being a real life soda company. So Fizz is the company that we've made up here. Here's another shot from Fallout 76. So this is really cool because they've established this branding of this gas station that's essentially throughout the entire world in multiple locations. But every time you see one of these, you kind of have an idea of, once you've seen it once, you have an idea of like, oh, next time I see that, I kind of know what this is. I kind of know what's to be expected in there. And I kind of know what my interaction with this space will be because I've already explored one before. So they've actually promoted a franchise in a fake world that you already understand and anticipate based on your first experience. And then another thing too is like, we don't always have to say things. We don't have to like have signs that promote that information. We don't always have to like have like actual words that spell things out. Just having little context clues, little props, little assets that really tell a story. We can establish who exactly the person that lives in this room is, what kind of life they're living, what their hobbies are, what they enjoy, what kind of things they just like in general.